James, I think I've solved it.
Oh, the Rubik's Cube. You know that takes me like 40 seconds, right?
No, I gave up on that hours ago. This is much bigger than that.
Oh, you've made your next chess move. Look, I'm just in a COD lobby right now, but I make my move between rounds.
No, I need a couple days on that one.
Gee, again. All right.
James, I solved the equation.
What equation?
That one you put on the whiteboard. I was cleaning the sink and I looked up and there it was. I didn't think anything of it, but then I remembered that we watched Good Will Hunting the other day and I thought, this is James's challenge to me to see if I can get into MIT or some equally prestigious mathematics university in Australia.
Probably Melbourne Uni.
Yeah, sure. So I looked at it, thought back to my high school study, meditated, read a couple old textbooks, replied to my pen pal, and then it hit me. It was an O, not a 0. Anyway, it took me all afternoon and I haven't cleaned the sink, but I solved it. What do I get now?
Walt, the only thing on that whiteboard right now is our shopping list.
So the answer isn't pie? Oh, pies. Meat pies?
Mince pies, Walt. Mince. You have to carry the C.
Well, I'll need a hand getting the entire C out of the car.
That is like such a classic punchline. You've heard the joke about what's a pirate's favorite letter?
No.
You'd think it's R, but it's actually the C.
There you go.
That's just an extended
I was just channeling,
punchline
extended
of that.
Sometimes the gag is just the alphabet.
Sometimes the gag is just a 20-second dad joke. That's all it is.
Welcome to the Get Commanded podcast. This is the GCP brought to you by POG. Palms Off Gaming, sponsor of this podcast, where all your dreams come true, but mostly the dreams about losing your teeth. I'm your host, Walt.
Have you seen the Duskmorn card with fear of losing
hate it.
It's like
awful.
Viscerally disturbing.
Like most of the art in that set.
Yeah, true. Hello, Commander players. I'm thinking of rhymes to kill time and just feeling fine, James.
Love that for you.
That took me 6 hours to figure that out.
But he got there, didn't he?
We did it in the end.
Before we get to this week's transmission, Patreon is the absolute best way to support the Get Commanded podcast. There's heaps of benefits on offer, including playing with us once a month. We had a game just last night for us with one of our patrons.
Yesterday morning for the Patreon because they're from the UK.
Yep.
But
and for the rest of you, 5 days ago. Anyway.
Time is a relative thing. But the game was awesome firstly. Regardless of all the Patreon stuff, Ben, seriously, that game last night was wildly entertaining.
It was like 2 and a bit hours long and it did not feel it because it was really close, like the whole way through.
We were also chit-chatting through it as well, just like being social. But it was a swings and throws kind of game. Like the power went from one person to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And I love games. That is like my peak way Commander should be, where it's like everyone is in the lead at one point, everyone is behind at one point.
Yeah.
I love games like that. And I also got to play my brand new deck, which is also fun.
And you also managed to gift me the win with it by giving me an extra turn.
2 extra turns,
That's
thankfully.
True.
You didn't need either of them.
To.
I was in a very sticky situation where I was like, I can either lose or give Walt an extra turn and hope that he can't win but can kill Ben and not me.
For reference, I was playing Barbara Saga and Ben was at 6 and you were at like 15, I think.
Something around there.
And the extra turn thing, it's the creature that ETBs and you gain protection from that player. Yeah, you gain protection from that player until your next turn. And so I think the thinking was, I can't see that Walt definitely has 16 points of life on me right now.
To drain me for 16. Because
Ben
I gain
for
protection.
Sure.
So
But Ben was definitely dead. As soon as you gave me that extra turn, it was like, I just tap Barber twice and I win.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I had a Psychosis Crawler in my hand.
That was enough to do
which effectively got me there. But yeah, we play once a month with our patrons of a certain tier. Obviously, we read out their names at the end of the episode. We also have overhauled some decks for people.
Yeah, we've done that live on stream as well, which is great fun.
Patrons request episode topics that we've covered.
Yep.
So one of them turned into a series, by the way.
Yeah, we really do care for our patrons. And if you do want to support Get Commanded, like if you are one of the people that download every episode, every week and you really love our show, and if you're thinking about giving back to us in any way, Patreon is just straight up the best way to do it. It makes genuinely things possible. We are just a team of two. We don't have like a production team or like camera, like, you know, we are just two guys working with the equipment that we have. We would really, really appreciate it and be able to make amazing content for you if you support us on Patreon.
Yeah, and some episodes of our podcast as well, we've been including little extra resources for the patrons specifically.
Yeah.
Wink.
Foreshadowing.
I might have read this command in advance. Anyway, speaking of, we have an incoming transmission from the deep depths of the galaxy from the Space Commanders. It's time to get commanded.
Five fun factors dictate your enjoyment of most Commander decks and should be evaluated. Originality, lines of play, responsiveness, power, and consistency.
Before we get to addressing this transmission, can I just address how weird it is to hear the Space Commanders talk about fun? Like, they talk about it every now and then, but in their voice.
They don't sound like fun-loving people, do they?
They don't sound like they go to the park often. No. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think they've ever thrown a Frisbee.
For fun, I like nangs. No, they wouldn't say that. I'm so sorry that I said that. I don't even know who I am anymore.
You live in Reservoir, that's what you do.
Look, this is very vague of the Space Commanders, I will say. They've just like listed some stuff.
Yeah, but I have a memory of you asking me to talk about my decks in relation to these 5 fun factors.
Yeah, they've caught me doing weird stuff on my own again.
You had an Excel spreadsheet open, you were bored, it was 3 a.m.
Maybe they just track my Excel. Maybe that gives them everything they ever need to know.
They've just got access to your Microsoft login.
They've just got a Google Sheet somewhere that just pulls from my Excel document. Anyway,
that's their idea of fun. Watching that is actually their idea of fun. Watching you do Excel spreadsheets.
I can see it, honestly.
Okay. Now I understand this command. Let's dive into this topic.
Dive into it. So, what are these fun factors that they're talking about? There's 5 of them. Look, I'm really bad at evaluating which decks I do and don't like, and you would know this, James, because I often ask you, hey, James, I'm feeling a bit funny about this deck. What do you think of it? And it takes you going, Walt, you hate that deck.
I haven't seen it in 6 years.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm often needing help from other people because I get so lost in the source of like, oh, maybe if I just tinkered with it some more, I could make it fun, that I forget that sometimes things are just not fun for me.
I think it's interesting because you often, in your daily life, we've talked about this before, you're a very scientific, objective, by the facts person. Like, if you can put a number against it, you prefer to do that, would you say? And I think
absolutely,
a person's own opinion on their own deck is often like vibe based.
Well, like, it's about as subjective as you can get, right? How do I feel when I do this?
It is, exactly. It's the most subjective thing, and you prefer the objective. So, look, you talked to me a few days ago about this and asked me to evaluate my own decks using your method.
So, look, basically, I was trying to find a way to be, quote, objective about my decks, to help me to kind of separate, to help me kind of quantify the feelings I get when I'm playing a deck, and put a number to it to be like, how fun is this deck in numbers?
That's right, ladies and gentlemen, non-binary friends. Walt has quantified feelings. You are a space commander, aren't you? You are just...
I'm getting there.
This whole thing, Get Commanded, was just a ploy to get me, a human, into this room to be abducted every now and then.
Yep. And there's a burlap sack coming over your head in 3,
in
2...
chloroform.
I
think it's really admirable that you've gone about this because, like, genuinely, it is a really emotional process to disassemble a deck.
Yeah.
That's like, I guess we could look at this as like a way to evaluate your decks to figure out which one you want to disassemble.
Definitely.
But it is just like when someone says, "Oh, what's your favorite commander deck?" Sometimes it's like picking your favorite kid, and you're like, I actually don't know and can't tell you that, this is kind of a really fun way to figure out which kid is your favorite.
Well, and that's the thing that I was trying to set out to do.
You could do this with your children. You could actually...
It's a good thing I don't have 16 children. Or any, by the way. I feel that's important to clarify. Anyway.
But less than 16.
Yeah. But like, I was really trying... I think my goal was to end up with a list of like my decks from... And then with a number next to each deck, where if I sorted it from the biggest to the smallest number, it would sort of align with my gut feeling about how I feel about each deck.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's that. If it didn't, the experiment wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, straight up.
That's the goal. That's the hypothesis.
Yeah, but definitely. So look, these 5 fun factors. I needed to work out what is it that I think contributes to whether or not I enjoy a deck. And so I did some brainstorming and I came up with what I think for me are the 5, and I think most people would have some number of these. Mm-hmm. What is the 5 things that are most responsible for how much fun a deck is for you specifically? I think it's important to clarify this. I know we often talk about the enjoyment of your play group and everything like that, and we're not going back on that, but this is a way of quantifying how much you enjoy a deck, and so some of these may not always align with how your play group feels about a deck of yours.
It's interesting, because when you asked me to like look at my own decks with these variables, I was like, trying to think of the other things that were like most important to me, and whether or not this aligned. And surprisingly, these 5 felt like the most in line.
Yeah, they align with you.
Yeah, I think there might be one that I'll switch, but we'll go through them and then I'll kind of evaluate.
Cool. So the 5 that I came up with were originality is the first one. So this is like, how original is this deck as an idea? So like, could you pull this deck off EDH rec, or is this like a spicy brew? Is this a commander that has like 7,000 decks on EDH rec, or is this a commander with like 40 decks on EDH rec? You know, generally, how original is your deck as a concept of an idea?
Yeah, I do love going onto EDH rec with a commander that I'm looking at building, and it'd be like, it's only got 100 decks, and I'm like, ooh,
hipster.
Look at me, Mr. Original.
It feels fun. It feels fun to break new ground, and for me, that's something that I enjoy about a deck. Is like, oh, this is something different.
I also really love bringing something new and unseen to my play group. Like if I bring Yuriko or Atraxa or like something that everyone's like, okay, yeah, we know what this deck does. I know how to evaluate it. If anything, James, don't even do a Rule Zero conversation. Let's just play the goddamn game.
I know what to expect. Yeah, absolutely. The second fun factor was, I mean, the Space Commander said lines of play. I've shortened this down just to lines, but same thing. How interesting are the lines of play? When you have a hand on a typical turn, turn 6 or 7, are there multiple sort of fun avenues you can go down within that hand? Or are you kind of just going, oh, that's the best spell, I'll just cast that. That's the best spell, I'll just cast that, kind of turn after turn.
Yeah, and to be honest, it taking a deck specifically out of the equation, this is one of the most fun things for me in a game. Is figuring out the line to win.
Like you love having a grip full of cards and 10 mana and going, okay, what the fuck am I going to do right now?
What 3 spells in combination win me the game?
Yeah. I think most of us really enjoy it, especially when you've been playing for quite a long time. This is what you get, a thrill of going, oh my god, I've got all these options.
Especially as the lines get more complicated, right? Like you're like, oh, I'm smarter. I'm a better person now.
I can sequence and do this in this way. Yeah, absolutely. The third fun factor was consistency. It's pretty straightforward. How consistently does the deck, quote, do the thing? How often does the deck have non-games, Yeah. Would you say 90% of the time your deck puts in a great performance and at least gets close to the winning line? Or is it sort of more like 60 or 50%?
We've done multiple entire episodes dedicated to the consistency of one's deck.
I think we both find it really important, right?
Clearly, we find this really important. I think that it would be hard to say that it's not, because we've said it in episodes about consistency, is if your deck is doing nothing, you are doing nothing. Like you are sat there bored out of your brain watching your friends play Commander, and occasionally you'll play an island. Like that is the most you'll do.
And it's important that when we say consistency, we're not saying sameness as well. And we've said this before, we want our deck to always do the thing. The thing doesn't have to be the same every time.
We want variance within the consistency. We want it to end up in the same place, but the road that it takes might be a bit different. Yeah.
We want to have a game, a functional game where we do the stuff that the deck wants to do.
100%.
The next one here, this is one I know you'll probably rate higher than me. Responsiveness.
I'd just like to interject here and say that this is a really important factor of any deck.
Whoa, that was definitely instant speed.
That was super meta, right? That was really funny. I completely agree. I genuinely think, for me, I'm surprised this was on your list, because when you told me about like what you were trying to do and then showed me the list of variables, I was like, okay, the fact that this is on your list is really interesting to me, because... And then I thought about it and thought about decks you'd brewed recently, like Gandalf, like Catilda and Lear, and that's a very respondy deck. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'm bringing Walt to the dark side on this one.
I honestly, it's just like, I like feeling like I have control over my destiny. And a lot of that will be about the consistency of the deck, but a lot of it is also just answers. You know, I like when
being able to stop your opponents so you can find the window is really crucial.
And when you have 2 mana open and you have either a protection spell or a removal spell, you know, that feels good. And like, how often can your deck leave 2 mana open? You know, these sorts of things do make a difference, like in how reactive you feel as a deck. Some decks kind of just want to empty their hand at sorcery speed. There's nothing wrong with that. I play a lot of decks like that.
And even me, I've got a few sorcery speed, dump your hand kind of decks.
You can't always respond. It's not always what your deck wants to be doing. But how reactive a deck is will dictate often how much fun you have, because sometimes you just want to be able to have all the answers and at least be able to answer. You know, someone gets miles ahead and you sort of go like, oh, I've got this great one-sided board wipe in my hand. Like, I'll have a way to get out of this. Doesn't have to be instant speed, by the way, when I say responsiveness.
Just answers.
Yeah.
It's the way to either stop your opponent or dig yourself out of a situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the final one, this one's not super important to me, but I know it's important to a lot of people. Power.
This was also probably the least important to me as well. I think I weighted it the lowest, I think.
You're getting ahead of yourself.
Yeah.
We'll get into that, but yes.
Oh, yes, we'll get to that. But like, I think that power is, without a shadow of a doubt for me, like just a thing that's like important pre-game. Yeah. Like once we're in the game and we've decided that these are the decks we're playing, I don't actually care who's got the most powerful deck at the table. Like by the, you know, if we're using Watsy's new bracket system, like I don't care if I'm sat against a you know, category 4 deck, because it might only be dictated by 1 or 2 cards.
Yeah,
you know, like it might just be that, you know, like really efficient board wipe with the Toxic
Our decks
Deluge
are equal, but you've got a Deluge, you've got a Cyclonic Rift.
Yeah,
like, otherwise we're pretty equal here.
Exactly. I think it's just about like, it's important. For me, power is more important with my deck collection. I want a big representation of like low-end power and absolute top of the table CDH, blow your nuts off kind of thing.
But what you're saying is that like, and I think I agree with you if this is the case, that the amount of fun that you could have in a game is not decided by whether you're playing your Niv Mizzet CDH deck or a precon.
No,
like
that
the
is
fun
not
will be dictated mostly by other stuff that happens in the game.
Because at the end of the day, and I've been spouting this for ages, Commander is Commander. There are multiple metagames and multiple mindsets of Commander. You are not going to take a CDH mindset into a precon game teaching a new person, and in the same way, you're not going to take a precon mindset teaching a new person into one of those mid-power kind of like grindy war of attrition games where everyone understands the rules. It is a different metagame. There are multiple of them. Stop saying it's casual and CDH. Rant over, continue.
But that said, you know, sometimes power is just fun. Yeah, sometimes you do want to reach for the most powerful deck in your collection.
And I think for some people, like I can go on a rant about that for sure, but I think some people would be like the idea of playing a slow precon game for some people is like eye clawing.
It's like pulling teeth.
Yeah. Nice reference. It is genuinely awful to some people. And like to some extent, I do find those games a bit boring just because I'm looking for, you know, like we said before, I'm looking for the excitement of finding lines and responding.
And
those things are less common in those lower power brackets. So for me, maybe, the lower power end is not as exciting and fun as the middle to top end.
Yeah.
But I get it. Like, there is fun to be had at all levels of this spectrum.
Yeah. And look, we discovered when those cards recently got banned, how many people derive great enjoyment from playing with the most powerful cards in our format as well. So, like, it's absolutely a valid way to play.
Yep.
So, originally, all I did was I gave each of my decks a score out of 10 in each of these categories and then tallied it up, and that was the score that a deck got. So, you know, if a deck got a 10 for consistency and a 5 for power, then it was 15, and then you add 3 other factors, you get to 40. That's the score of the deck. Sure. The problem I discovered, and that we've already kind of briefly mentioned, is that I don't care about some of these factors nearly as much as I care about others.
Yeah.
So for instance, power. Yeah, I don't really, doesn't bother me very much. It matters in the sense that, yeah, I match up decks and some of my more powerful decks are some of my slightly more favored ones, but mostly I'm interested in the other 4 factors. So yeah, I introduced a weighting scale.
Yeah.
So basically, each of the 5 fun factors then got a rating out of 5 to indicate how important the fun factor was to me. And then, yes, when I got James to do it for his decks, he used some slightly different weighting because he feels differently about some of these 5 fun factors.
The factors are the same, but how we feel about them are a little bit different.
Yeah.
And this is really interesting because we had a conversation about this pretty much at your doorstep, as I was leaving your house one night, and we were like, how do you solve this problem? And the weighting is kind of the way to solve it. Because it's an objective thing that you're trying to do with subjective variables. So you're bringing the subjectivity into the equation.
Yeah. And by the way, we will be sharing with the patrons a spreadsheet where you can do this to all of your decks as well. And you can assign a weighting scale, you can put in all your values and it'll spit out a score for you. And then about 5 days after this episode comes out, we'll make it live for everybody in our Discord server as well. So you'll want to be in there to make sure you can get access to it as well. But the patrons will get access straight away. So another great reason to join Patreon.
I'm glad we're giving this one to everyone. Usually the Patreons are the only people that get it, but I'm really passionate about this it's fun. Give you all a chance to experiment with how you look at your decks.
Yeah. For reference, I don't want to pretend I've come up with some crazy formula. All it does is multiply the number that you put in each of those 5 factors by your weighting. So for instance, if you had a 5, it multiplies that number. Like if you got a 10 in something, 10 in consistency, and you said consistency is a 5 out of 5 most important to you, you'd get 50 points.
So that score becomes 50.
Yeah, whereas if it was a score of 1, that would only carry 10 across. So
super interesting.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I thought for sure that would be too simple of maths. It actually works pretty well, as we'll discover.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, multiplication is, I feel twice as strongly about this variable than I do the other one.
Yeah.
Therefore, I'll double its score in the total equation. I like it.
Cool. So, what weighting did I use for my decks? So, for originality, I chose a weighting of 4 out of 5. It's pretty important to me. It's not the most important thing ever, but I do really find I gravitate towards my decks that I feel are more original.
It's something you chase as well.
Absolutely.
You chase it in deck building for sure.
And for reference, some of my highest scoring decks in this were my Queen Marchesa deck, which has got a goth/my partner theme.
Yep.
And Thursday Incarnate, which is a commander that I entirely designed on my own to play my 50 Thursdays cards in.
And selected underplayed and very cheap non-staple cards. You couldn't get more original than your Thrifty Thursday
I picked them. Literally nobody else did. Yeah. Lines, I actually had as a 5. I had a big think about this, and I think the decks that I ultimately, more than any other, I'm like, I must play this deck. It's because the lines of play are fun.
I think you're becoming more like me as time goes on. I think I'm converting you to a responsive, complicated rules person.
I could see it, honestly.
Even last night, you said, "Oh, isn't that an intervening if?" And I was like, "Oh, look at you go,
Mr. Rules Man."
Mr. Rules Man.
For reference, my highest score for lines of play was a 10 for Gandalf the White.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, there's just always stuff to do.
Anything.
Yeah. It's really, really
fun.
It
is like a pile of trash, assemble your own win condition.
Big time. Responsiveness, I had as a 2.
Okay, maybe I'm not changing you as much as I thought.
I like it in decks. It matters to me, but not a massive amount. And again, my highest score here was Gandalf the White with a 9.
Everything's flash.
Everything's flash. Makes sense. You can respond to anything you want. For power, I had a 1. Fully doesn't matter to me at all, really. I liked that it was in there as a thing that was factoring in, but it's not something that really changes my mind very much. Obviously, my highest score here was my CDH deck, my Yashan deck, which is probably going to get disassembled soon. But that's okay.
Yeah, R.I.P. Big Pig.
I'll turn it into something else. I'll have another Selesnya or Selesnya-ish stacks deck.
Well, I think, probably, to be honest, green-white, now, is pretty good.
It's better than it was,
there's probably
right?
staples in that deck that you can, salvage, but the strategy is probably not there.
Yeah, I've noticed on the database that there's... It started seeing some play. Elevere. Elevere is still on the database.
Deck is cracked. And it's also, I think in the new meta might be one of the decks that if you do want to play a stacks build, this is the way to do it, just purely because you're punching damage through very early and very quickly.
And it's also a card draw engine in the command zone,
which helps with stack stacks.
Yeah, well, that's a big thing. Like my deck had like every single one of those creatures that says creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Because that's you got to keep your hand full as a stacks deck. And then the final fun factor, consistency, I had as a 4. Again, pretty important to me that a deck is consistent. My highest scores for consistency, I had 10s for my Rith the Awakener deck and my Barbala Saga deck.
Yeah, I would say that they are, out of all of your decks, they're the decks that do it every time I play against them.
It's really hard to think of a time that they haven't at least put in a good show.
Big thing for Barber is just the curve. It's so low.
It's so low.
Like if you have 3 lands, you can do anything and everything the deck wants to do. It's
there's
really
like
cool.
2 5-drops in the deck and nothing higher than 5.
Yeah, that's the top of the curve. That's great.
So excitingly,
results.
The
stats.
The ranks.
25 minutes in and we're finally here.
So the numbers vary all the way from 141 down to 72. So quite
that's actually
a spectrum.
Big variance, sure. Yeah. And for context, you have 16 decks,
I have 16 decks, yeah. So I counted every one of my casual decks and my CDH deck. I did not count my pre-con because I don't play it and it's not a deck I built. I won't go through every single one here. Well, maybe I'll share this with the patrons as well. They can see what all of our decks came in. But we'll talk about the tops and the bottoms. So the top of the list, probably unsurprisingly, given that we just talked about it twice already, Gandalf the White.
And also, we've talked about it on like the past 20 episodes of this podcast since you built it. I
love it, dude. I love it so much.
Deck.
It's amazing. So that came in at 141. In second, we had Barbala Saga with 133.
That's considerably bit lower than Gandalf. Gandalf is like a whole
it's a whole tier above.
Like,
a lot of the other results are a lot closer to each other in
because like Barber's 133 is the final score.
Yeah, and then Azora's 131.
And that's the next one down. So they're really close.
And then Humans was 130. And for reference, there's then 2 decks at 129. And by Humans, I mean my Catilda and Lear deck. So those were, unsurprisingly, I looked at those decks and I was like, those are decks that I reach for a lot.
They're the ones that are most consistently played. I reckon if you checked your game log, these decks would come up the most.
I think, well, except for one notable exception, which we'll talk about when we talk about all the results. The bottom 4 decks in my list were Averna, the Chaos Bloom at 90 points. This is my Cascade Landfall deck. Just not one I reach for very often, so this kind of checks out, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Sir Gwyn, my Knights deck at 86.
That shocks me.
Yeah. Also at 86, my Merrin Secret Commander Gerard at the 15th slot. And then right at the bottom of the list is Yashan with 72 points.
So there's the CDH effect of Walt just like not really being a CDH person, dropping very low.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised with Merrin. I am surprised with Seguin. They seem very low to me. But
so in general, like if you're looking at this list, you can see the whole list as well.
Yeah.
What seems like does everything seem just about right? What seems too high and what seems too low? Because for me, I looked at it and I really like my Azor the Lawbringer deck, but it did kind of shock me because, when you look at those other 3 in the top 4, Gandalf, Barbala Saga, Catilda, and Lear, I play so much of those decks. I don't play very much of Azor.
And even going like a couple lower, Marchesa is next and then Rith. Like both of those commanders I see more often than Azor.
Yes.
I will very happily say I told you so on this one because I've been telling you to play more Azor more often because mainly it's one of your most powerful decks like in casual.
Yeah.
And I think there are some decks of mine that I would love to play against you but don't get often chance to just because you're not bringing the same kind of heat to the table. And I genuinely think Azor, you're running a Rhystic Study. You've got a Solitude. These are like, free interaction spells.
There's a One Ring in there.
These are like strong cards. And I think that I think you're averse to playing with it because you have such a staunch, casual commander is about these cards and this way of playing. Yeah. Which is I have huge respect for you for that firstly. But you have built this deck. And the numbers don't lie, man. You clearly like it, even though it does contain Rhystic Study, the One Ring, Solitude, Swords to Plowshares.
It does a lot of things that I find really important. It was very high on lines of play. It was very high on consistency.
Super responsive. Lots of answers.
Also not a brew I don't think I've ever seen another Azor the Lawbringer deck. I saw one on game nights 5 years ago, and it was like a Staxy control.
It was almost like a Grand Arbiter commander.
Yeah, it was more playing it as like Sphinx's Revelation being like a control piece rather than a like win con like it is in my deck. So it was very high on originality as well. Yeah, look, I like the deck a lot. I think I just need to make sure I'm finding time and room for those higher powered games because it's a deck that I really enjoy, and clearly because it's right up there on the fun factors.
It's number 3. It's on the podium. It's
on
the podium.
It's right up there.
I think Azor was the one that shocked me being so high. I think Merrin does not shock me at all being so low.
Sure.
The thing that does shock me is, in theory, it should be higher.
How do you mean?
Like, when I think about the fun factors, like, for originality, right? Your Merrin deck is a Power Matters Secret Commander, Gerard Golgari Lichlord.
It's high
deck.
on that factor, for
It's
sure.
high on that factor. For lines of play, there's a lot of ways to win in that deck. Like, I've seen you win with overrun effects. I've seen you win with, like, a Living Death. I've seen you win with, like even Aristocrats piece. Like, I've seen you win with... Like, there's things about this, even responsiveness, like there's things that this deck can do that in theory should make it higher, but I think there's maybe a bit of personal bias going on here, potentially, and we can talk about the limitations of this whole experiment.
Yeah.
But I just don't think it's the deck you want to pull out at the moment, so maybe you're ranking them lower because you've seen it not do it as well as it's done in the past. I don't know, but like... I feel like Merrin is a deck that, in theory, should have been higher.
Yeah. Look, I think that sometimes that this is actually the beauty of subjective values is that we do influence them in this way. Because, like, as you're saying that, you're totally right that those things should be scored higher, but I don't think I scored them that highly because they don't feel that way to me. Look, when you said, like, lines of play, as you're describing, I'm going, that makes sense. But when I'm playing the deck, I feel like I'm railroaded towards a particular way. And then, consistency was one thing I rated really lowly on this deck because I've had some real non-games with it lately.
I have seen you do nothing with this deck
absolutely
recently.
nothing. But it's funny. Like, it's a deck that theoretically, I agree, like not in a perfect world, but maybe objectively.
In a scientific, objective world,
it probably would be
higher.
higher. But then equally, I think seeing it down there has reminded me that I wanted to disassemble it. And that probably that's why I gave it the marks that I did.
You're maybe unconsciously trying to confirm your, like,
It's might have been what I was searching for. Yeah.
Does it make you feel like confident in a decision to disassemble it, seeing it this low on the list?
I think it either needs to be disassembled or turned into another deck. I might have said this to you like once before. I was thinking of making it potentially into an old Stick Fingers deck.
Oh yeah, so keeping Golgari, keeping some
Golgari,
of the theme, and
I wanted to still keep it Gerard as the main win con, but to have not so much this like sacrifice reanimator package that Merrin really wants, because I think that's what's happening with the deck is it's doing these two things that are quite different from each other.
Sure.
Alternatively, I have been eyeing off my mono black list, which I think I'm almost ready to pull the trigger on.
Oh, sweet. Card order coming.
Give me,
Sweet.
This would give me the deck box and the sleeves for that deck. So, it's definitely a possibility. The one that shocked me being so low was Seguin, for sure.
I'm not shocked at this, to be perfectly honest. No.
I think I'm so proud of it as a deck. Like, I think
you're proud of the Vorthos.
Yeah, because for reference, this is my Vorthos Knights deck. So like, not only are all the creatures knights or look like knights, but also like all the spells seem like things that a knight would do, like Valorous Stance and stuff like that.
Even all the way down to the choice of lands. Like you chose
there are castles in the art.
You chose specific art for the basic lands to make sure that they fit the theme.
Yeah, and there's like the equipment, like that you won't find a skull clamp in that deck because that doesn't feel like an equipment, a knight's sort of equipment. There are javelins and there are maces and there are spears, and there are swords. Anyway, so I think as a concept, I'm so proud of the deck, but really this is about the fun of playing the deck, these 5 fun factors. And so equally, I can see why, consistency-wise, it's okay. Originality-wise, it's up there, but then, like lines of play, not very good.
It's incredibly straightforward. That was the thing that, like, when I looked at the list and saw Seguin down there, I was like, what variable dragged that to the bottom? And I think it's lines of play.
Yeah, I think it was probably one of the lowest decks that I've rated for lines of play.
Yeah, it is just, like, get a knight, equip knight, swing knight. Yeah. Get another knight, equip that knight, swing knight. Yeah,
like it's not really anything else that the deck does.
You wouldn't need to write a very long primer to give this deck to someone.
No. No, it's true.
But it is upsetting seeing a deck that you love so much at that low. Because like it's interesting, like the difference between Merrin and Seguin is Merrin you've fallen out of love with. Seguin you still have a lot of love for. You just like overhauled it in like the past couple of months.
It's in the best spot that it's ever been.
Yeah,
for sure.
And you made like nearly 10 edits to it.
It was quite a substantial. I put a lot more card draw in to make it more consistent.
Yeah, so you've given that the like you want it to be there. Whereas Merrin, I don't think you've touched in Yonks.
No, I think the last card I put in was Infested Thrynax, and I don't think I've even played the deck since I put that in, and that was a Modern Horizons 3 card.
But that was only one card as well.
That was one card.
Do you know what I mean?
Like, I'm not going like, oh my god, new toys.
You're not looking out for Merrin upgrades.
No.
You're looking out for Seguin upgrades.
Yeah, it's
but like,
true.
I think that's the interesting thing that this scale and this like fun factor experiment is doing. Is showing you that like a deck that you love can score pretty low and a deck that you hate can also score pretty low.
Yeah.
So it's a real interesting, and like I think this is something that you need to walk away on and have a think to yourself about. What do you want to do with these two decks? Do you want to keep Seguin around? Do you want to change it?
Yeah.
Why is it scoring so low? What's the thing that you need to change about the deck to bring that score up again?
Yeah. No, I think you're probably right. Definitely. I had one more question that I wanted to ask you specifically, which was how do you find that these results relate to how much fun you find each deck to play against? Because as I said before, like these fun factors are really about my personal experience playing the deck, and that's what they're for. But I'm interested to see how much this aligns with your feeling towards these decks.
Okay, the thing that I immediately notice about this list for me is the top of the list. And all of those decks being really interactive and responsive decks. And I love that.
Yeah.
Like, for me, playing against, if the whole pod is interactive and respondy, that's my dream scenario.
Yeah.
The situation where it's like, ooh, I have this response. And you're like, but I counter that response with this response. And you go, I have the perfect retort to your thing. And it's like this back and forth. It's almost like you're jousting 4 ways. Like you've got like a 4-way joust going on. It's very technical, very complicated. And I think the games that I have the most complicated responsey time with you is when you play, you know, Azor, Barbala Saga, Gandalf, these like really top of your list decks. I think that that's the thing that excites me the most. So it's interesting that if I was to rank the decks that I find most fun to play against you, I think the top 4 would be the same. I genuinely do. Like humans, Azor, Barba, and Gandalf are all... Yeah, I actually think on reflection, like just like for a quick second there, taking it in, I think that's what I would put in the top 4, which is super interesting. Which I think is a interesting thing about us, because we often think we're very, very different Commander players.
Yeah.
But it actually might be that we've got more in common about deck preferences than we think.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why we play against each other so often. That's why we want to do it. Yeah.
It's interesting. I think we have a lot in common, and then the points of difference are interesting. And that's like I find it interesting playing with you because I can see that you prioritize things slightly differently to me. But then, equally, I think that the ideal Commander game that me and you are searching for is quite similar.
Yeah, I think it's almost the same.
Yeah. I'd say so. Yeah.
I think the one thing about this that I'm really sad at is that 2 of my favorite decks of yours are actually really low.
Right.
Arami and Averna in 12th and 13th
Arami
spots.
was 12th. Yeah, that's true.
I can see why that, you know, there's a lot of like linear lines. There's, you know, it's not incredibly responsive, but the decks are complicated. And for me, I enjoy decks with a lot of moving parts. And I think that those 2 decks have a ton of moving parts. Like Averna having a cascade interrupting trigger, like that's weird. And I love how that effect works. Arami, like Encore is a very set-based mechanic from Commander Legends that we haven't seen printed again, which is always entertaining to see come out. I really like these kind of complicated decks, but I see why they're lower on your list. I like playing against them, is what I say. Because, do you know what I mean? Like, I like seeing something with a lot of originality come out. I guess, originality is one of the variables, but...
Yeah, I actually, Araumi, Verna got a decent originality. Araumi got a reasonably low one. Like, I don't think that my Araumi deck is, like, completely by the numbers.
Well,
but
it's a blue-black reanimated deck, right?
Yeah,
I think
it plays a lot of the cards you'd expect to see in an Araumi deck as well.
Or just in a blue-black reanimated deck, to be honest. Yeah. Look, I think that it lines up pretty well with how I would play against it.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of impressed at how well this scale has shown that me and you are more similar than we are different in deck evaluation.
Great, that's good to know.
It's interesting.
I will say that I think the only decks that are in danger of like being disassembled or changed are those bottom three. Yasham, which I've already said I'm going to change to a different commander, Marin and Sir Gwyn. So yes, don't worry, Araumi and Averna are safe, is what I'm saying.
Good. I'd like to see you play. Can I request Araumi, Averna, and Azor be played? All the A's. I'd like the A's played more.
More representation from the top of the alphabet. No C's. Can't fit them in the shopping bags. We've been talking for a while. I reckon it might be time for a thrifty interlude.
Yeah, this is the point of the, Beautiful Minds story where the two mathematicians are staring at the blackboard, holding a cup of tea, and they're just like, we just can't crack it. And one of them, like halfway through a sip, will spit out a mouthful of tea and go, by Joe, I think I've got it. That's this point of the film.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
How could I forget?
It's the little intermission. Where like the montage is slowed down.
Right. And then they like, stop and they're contemplating with the tea.
And like the music stops and like, that's...
Okay, no, I see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
We've got lots to talk about, including all of James's decks, which, by the way, he doesn't know the values that got spat out by the formula.
No, I was told to give numbers basically against my decks and not told what kind of maths was being done. So I had the least amount of information going into my assessment. So
I'm very excited to unveil those results for you.
To be honest, this episode is just for us. Some listeners might have tuned out by this point.
Before we get to all of that, let's hear a little something about a thrifty card. As is tradition, I will be performing, and this week it's the Cowled Merchant with some new wares. James, you want to read the card we're featuring this week?
I sure would, because this is one of the very few free interaction spells that you allow yourself to play in Casual Commander. It's Lethal Scheme. For 2 black and a black, you get an instant with Convoke. There's the free bit for you. Destroy target creature or planeswalker. Each creature that convoked Lethal Scheme connives. That's draw a card and discard a card. If you discarded an on-land card this way, put a +1 counter on that creature.
Ever find yourself mentally plotting? Find that your plots sometimes become deadly? That it might be time for a scheme, trademark. All of your plots can find meaning in a scheme, trademark. And speaking of, my schemes, trademark, comprise the cumulative meaning of every circumstance in which one could use the word scheme. We'll be making plans in a devious way, and it'll definitely be a large-scale way of attaining a particular object, but also the plans will be arranged by colour palette, and we'll organise the whole thing in an estate of social housing in Scotland. They may take our lives, but they will never take away our scheming! Trademark. Lee Harvey Oswald has got nothing on you. 14 knives, 7 Glaswegians, a 3D model of the Thames, and matching pink leotards. Mainly because Lee Harvey Oswald has never been seen in pink. He's always wearing black, white, or grey in the photos, like a penguin. And penguins don't scheme, trademark. They get in ritual circles and radicalise. Get budgeted.
He's trademarking the word scheme now.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough.
Oh, shit. Keep on scrolling. I've got to not reveal your scores. Yes. Yes, he has. Apparently.
Well,
he also doesn't seem to understand what black and white photos are, but you know.
Yeah, I mean... But that, he famously did. Lee Harvey Oswald just wore black, grey, and occasionally white.
Show me a photo of Lee Harvey Oswald wearing pink.
Prove me wrong.
Debate me. Thrifty Thursdays happens every week in our Discord server. You can check out the dedicated channel, play some games, or get some advice on your latest deck.
And just hang out.
It's a good place to hang out.
Super
Chat.
chill.
Chat about stuff.
All right, I can't wait. Come on.
You pumped?
You already accidentally scrolled, but I didn't. I was looking in the opposite direction, so I didn't see any of the scores.
He still has not seen his scores.
I'm super interested.
He has not seen his weighted table. That said, you did provide a score for every one of these fun factors for every one of your decks.
I did weigh them, yes.
Yep, and you did also give weight to each of the 5 fun factors.
Yes, I weighed those too.
And yours are different from mine. What did you use?
Well, for originality, I put a 3, which I am, on reflection, pretty happy with that because I didn't know yours either. I had no idea how you scored and how
I was
you
a 4,
weighed.
I believe. So you're slightly less important to you than me.
And I think I'm happy with that
Sure.
I am lower than you because I don't think that I chase originality as much as you do.
Yep.
I think I chase the other variables a
Yes.
little bit more. Like,
Sure.
for example, lines I had at a 5. That's the thing. That was the one and only 5 that I gave. That's the thing that I'm chasing. I want weird ways to win and interesting ways to win. Sometimes necessarily the deck might not have to have multiple different lines, but the one line that it has to be interesting. to me.
For sure.
Like when I brewed Sally Sparrow, for example, that was like an interesting one for me because I was like, it's winning in an overrun effect in Azorius, but animating artifacts.
Yeah.
And I love that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So for originality, your highest scoring decks were 8s. So this makes sense.
Sure.
It's not something that you prioritize.
Yep.
Tornos, Ukima, and Sally Sparrow were all 8s.
Yep. Ukima definitely is probably one of my most originals, I
Yep.
would say. And Tornos, actually.
Yep. And then your lines. You had the highest scores for Tornos and Cormella.
Yeah.
Your CDH deck. So you put not all your CDH decks. You just
I put
evaluated
2. I put
Niv,
Niv,
Mizzet,
and Cormella. They're
Okay.
like, I have Mad Farm as well. I have Yuriko as well. I have a Slimefoot and Squeak.
You didn't evaluate those.
No. I thought like I'll put the 2 that are like I'm either known for or like that I care most about. And
you play those 2 the most as well,
100%.
I would say. by a long
Cormella is
way.
like my pet project at the moment that I'm trying to figure out.
That makes sense.
But yeah, Tornos up there as well. That deck is a like figure out your own line in your own time kind of thing.
And it is the kind of thing where you could give that deck to a bunch of different people and they would try and win a bunch of different ways. Like if you gave that deck to me, I would not win the way that you win with that deck.
You would
find something else.
Yeah, and you would probably be attracted to a certain line. Like there's a tokens thing in there that
which
you
is
would
great,
like.
by the way.
Yeah,
that's
and
a really cool thing about a deck.
And I love the fact that the deck is able to function while doing so many different things.
Yeah.
Like, that's something that we talk about in our deck building process. That's a really hard thing to balance. Like, don't try and have too many sub themes.
Yeah.
But I'm really glad where Tornos is at because like all the sub themes support each other and they do things, and no matter what hand you draw, you'll be able to do something with it. I really like where that deck's at for lines.
It just works.
Responsiveness is the other fun factor that I had pretty high. I had it at a 4.
So I think I had a 2 here.
This was our probably biggest discrepancy.
This makes sense to me. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I just love the decks that can respond. I've got it tattooed on my arm.
Yep.
I see you've noted that Sally and Niv were the highest, which makes a lot of sense. Sally Sparrow is a flash build and Niv is a control deck.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense.
Makes a lot of sense. Power, I didn't go all the way to 1, but I did have it at a 2.
Sure.
So
that makes sense to me. I think you chased this slightly more than we did. I mean, even when we talked about the factors at the top of the episode, you did say you enjoy playing at that higher power. So that makes sense to me.
Yeah. And like we had that whole discussion about like high powered casual commander. And we had this whole discussion of like, I really, really enjoy that.
Yeah.
Whereas you're like, not so much.
Yeah.
You know? Like that is an important thing for me.
Obviously, the highest scores for your power were 10s for your CDH decks.
It would really upset me if a casual deck beat one of my CDH decks.
There's something wrong with the world, I think.
Clearly got something wrong about casual and CDH. Consistency, I also put as a 4.
Yeah, we had both 4s, didn't we?
Yeah. I think this is the thing that this is the thing we align most on, right? In this podcast
We've
specifically.
both spoken at length about how much we're chasing this in our decks.
And we've both written episodes for the Space Commanders that are entirely dedicated to the topic of consistency.
Yep.
And I can see you put Tornos and Cormella as
you
the
both had
highest
as
rated.
9s on consistency.
That makes sense. I think that, Tornos always does a thing. It might not be the thing.
Not the same thing.
It's a thing.
No.
And Cormella is, definitely. Because it's interesting that Niv didn't quite make it because my Niv CDH deck is 0 proxied. The consistency is, especially when you're analyzing it from a CDH perspective, like just not having a volcanic island is just a little bit lower on consistency.
Yeah.
Having like I don't have a Gilded Drake, for example. I have the Volatile Storm Drake from MTG, which is
it feels
a
wrong.
good equivalent, but it's like not the same.
No, it feels wrong when you're looking at a CEDH deck to give a deck full marks if it is not playing the kind of strictly better versions of the cards.
Yes, and like I am playing, like my Niv deck is pretty much all there. Like it's
like 4 cards off or something.
It is incredibly close. Yeah, there's like the cards that I'm thinking at the top of my head: a Gilded Drake,
Volcanic
Island, and then probably Time Twister is the only big hit for that deck that is needed. Yeah, because that's part of the combo as well.
Yeah,
to reshuffle your library.
That makes sense.
But yeah, I'm after hearing how you weighted yours.
Yep,
I am pretty happy with how I weighted mine. It makes a lot of sense to me.
It lines up a lot with how you play the game, which I think is a really good thing. And like we said, it's similar to mine, but it is different. Which is cool to see as well.
And it's good that we gave them almost we gave consistency a 4. Like it's not the most important thing we're looking for.
Also, both gave lines of 5.
Do we?
I'm pretty sure. Let me scroll up for a moment.
You did give lines of 5.
I gave lines of 5. So there you go.
It is kind of wild to me that we share so much in common about the things we look for in a deck that are fun. That's actually really, it's made me really appreciate how similar we are as Commander players, but how we can go about these things in completely different ways.
I also feel really good about the 5 fun factors that I chose. If it meant that we could land on ones in a similar way, that to me says, oh, not only do we have fun in a similar way, but we have fun. These are important things for playing Commander. Anyway, we got to the really exciting bit. James has not seen this yet.
I've not seen this. We're going to scroll down so stoked.
and see where the scores landed. So,
yes, he made
12 decks.
Okay, good. All right,
12 decks here. There's there's a lot wider of a range of scores here. I will say that James had. Overall, you weighted things slightly higher than me. I think you had maybe 1 or 2 more weighting.
I didn't have a 1 in there either.
No, so that is going to just naturally make your scores creep a bit. But that said, the discrepancy is quite wide. So we go all the way from 158, quite a bit higher than mine, down to 58.
And I can see the 2 decks at the top and at the bottom.
So we should run through just at least the top and the bottom of this list. So at the top, you got Tornos, 158.
I'm so glad he made it to the top.
Yep.
That it is genuinely, I think, the most James deck I've ever built.
Yep.
And is it's always so easy for me to put that in the box of Commander decks that I bring to the store because I'm like, it is a good power level to fit it at a lot of tables, and it's always going to make me happy.
Yeah, it's a great deck. I was glad to see it at the top as well. In the second slot, you've got Cormella with 146. So this is higher than your Niv Mizzet deck, which is one thing that shocked me.
Kind of insane, but actually I do understand it. I do get it. I love Niv, and there's a lot about Niv that I love that fall outside of these factors. But Cormella scores so high across the board in all of them.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And the other thing about the reason why I think Cormella's higher than Niv is it's a much more original deck. Niv is a solved CEDH deck. If we're looking at it from a CEDH perspective, Niv is done. Niv has been done before and has been done for years.
Yeah.
Cormella is a commander from the last couple of years. And every set, people are testing new cards with it. You know what I mean?
Still being worked out.
Still being figured out.
New lines being explored. New potential as well. Every time you put a card in, it's I don't know what this is going to do here.
I'm currently actually got an extensive direct message conversation with one of the guys from the Cormella. Well, it's the Discord is not Cormella only. It's called the Grixis Mean Girls server. And it's got Cormella, it's got Elevere, and a bunch of other Grixis commanders that are all fun. Women, which I love. So it's the Grixis Mean Girls commander.
I love that.
And we're in an extensive conversation, and our lists, when we started talking, were very different. They had a very different idea of what Cormella should be. And now they're creeping closer and closer together. And it's almost like we're solving the commander together.
That's an exciting process.
I think that's probably one of the factors that bumped Cormella up was that it's more original. And you're
feeling that excitement about that. Yeah, that makes sense. In the third slot, we have Sally Sparrow at 133. This is a very recent brew of yours. Yep. I see you have a lot of fun playing this deck. So that makes a lot of sense to me. I think we should just mention that the next 2 were very close behind and both tied on 130. It was Savine the Chronoclasm and Niv Mizzet. So
I think the same about spell slinging decks. Full stop. If I build a spell slinging deck, it is 130 points.
Yeah, there you go. It can't be changed.
No.
I think we'll jump straight to the bottom of the list here. Sure. Bottom 3 decks we have is Ninth Doctor at 101. This is the 10th deck on the list. So third from the bottom because you only did 12 altogether.
It's going to get an overhaul. I'm curious to see how that would change after the overhaul.
We have Scorpion God at 11th with 97 points.
Yeah.
Also a deck that I don't see you reach for a ton and probably maybe one that needs a little bit more. Would you say it needs a little bit more cooking in the oven?
I think it needs a little bit more streamlining.
Sure.
I don't think that
trying to do a few too many things.
I've cooked with it. Like it's a delicious dish. It just needs to be streamlined in its time to get from the kitchen to my plate. You know what I mean? Like get from the start of the game to the win con.
You got to optimize the recipe.
Yeah, sure. Optimize the recipe. Get that cooking time down. What I'm trying to do is a gourmet meal. I want McDonald's. Like get that shit out of the window into my car.
And at the very bottom of the list, at a huge drop in points, by the way, from 97 down to 58, is Ayula Queen Among Bears.
I'm not shocked.
Slot. No, I expected that.
Yeah,
honestly.
I've tried so many times with this deck.
Yeah.
I just don't think it's me.
Yeah.
At all. Like I don't think it's what I want to do. And like I built it because everyone was like, James doesn't play green. And I was like, okay, well, I'll build a mono green creature typal deck.
Yeah.
And I was like, sure, this is like fighting stuff. And if I get Yever out, it's flashing things and it can be totally me. But like, I don't always get Yever out.
No.
And
there's like 3 cards in the deck that I would say if they're on the field, they start to feel like a James kind of deck.
Yeah.
But if they're not, Yever, I would say Bearscape is a similar thing.
Oh yeah, trying to mill myself and like activate get bears at instant speed.
And Foe Razor Region is one that I think of in that deck that also feels like
wildly synergistic.
It's so good in that deck. But yeah, like if those cards aren't out, I see you do a lot of play bear, pass, play bear, pass, and it's really not you.
Yeah, I genuinely think it is the least fun I have playing Commander when I'm playing this deck. It's really upsetting as well because it's the deck that I typically pull out when I'm trying to introduce someone to Commander because it's a very
straightforward.
Yeah, it's really easy to follow, right? Like a new player can follow bear enters, bear fights, bear get bigger, bear swing. Like that is a simple deck.
Yeah.
But like while they're enjoying the simplicity of it, I'm dying inside about the simplicity of it. And
I think there's some kind of balance that can be struck here where I feel like maybe there's a future commander that you build that is straightforward to follow from the outside, but has interesting lines for you to play. Like I'm thinking about, as an example, my Catilda and Lear deck, which I think doesn't do... It's a little bit complex, but it's not super crazy to look at, but you have so many options when you're playing it. And it's a low power level as well.
Like when you cast a human and you say, I'm going to target rampant growth to give flashback. Yeah. From the outside, I'm like, cool, understand that. But from the inside, you're like, I had 9 options of A, what human to cast, and B, what spell to cast.
Whereas
like
bears don't do that.
Bears don't do it. But I cast bear get big, bear fight something, bear swing.
I think there's some sort of future deck. Because like, for instance, your Ukima and Kazur deck is quite easy to follow.
Yeah, true.
But has really interesting lines of play and is very you.
And Ukima scored a lot. Ukima came 7th.
Yeah.
Ukima came at
right in the middle of the pack.
So like Ukima is now probably the deck I would gravitate more towards teaching a new player how to play the game of Commander. Yeah.
Yeah. So does this seem right? Is my first question that I asked you. Does anything seem high? Anything seem low?
No, I think this is actually bloody perfect.
Feels pretty right to you?
It feels pretty bang on.
Yeah.
I will say that it is upsetting to see Niv so middle of the pack. It is 5th. Yeah. So that is like, it's still in the top half.
There is like I will say there's kind of a noticeable, probably 3 parts of this list where there's like your top 7 are all from 120 through 158. Then there's quite a drop to 3 decks that are all in that, or 4 decks that are all in that 100 mark. Yeah. And then it drops all the way to Ayula. So I almost feel as though I would say that those top 7 are super solid. Yeah. And then 8 through 11, Zaxara, Scarab God, 9th Doctor, Scorpion God, they feel like they're tenuous. And then Ayula is a clear, non-starter.
I think the commonality between the bottom half of the decks is that I think it's the consistency of them. I'd be curious to like reflect on the scores of the consistency with them. Because just looking at them, it's like Zaxara is, by definition of big mana deck, boom or bust, right? Yeah. Scarab God is a little less boom or bust, but like if I don't there's things that make that deck incredibly consistent, like the strong tutors, like the other day I had Entomb and Reanimate in my opening hand, and got Sphinx of the Second Sun out turn 2. Like that's
crazy.
That's insane for a casual game.
The potential for power is very high, but the consistency might not be there.
Yeah, but that's the thing. That's one game out of 20, and the rest of, like, I would say probably 5 out of those 20 games, the deck is struggling to develop a board state. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense.
9th Doctor as well. I mean,
wildly inconsistent.
That's been a meme on our Twitch show. Like every time I played it, it was like, this will be the time it wins. It never was.
No.
Like, because it either does it either explodes but never wins because everyone's like, oh shit, James is about to win.
Board.
We need to kill James. Or it just doesn't get any, like it gets a couple of upkeep triggers that are nowhere near valuable enough to actually win me the game.
Yeah.
And yeah, Scorpion God is a similar thing. I think that there's a couple of things in that deck that, I want to kind of streamline.
Yep.
I think this deck is the one that has the most potential for improvement, interestingly.
I think that the deck suits you.
Yeah.
Like I don't think it needs a different commander or a different strategy. I think you're right. I think it needs a streamlining. I think like
Just
when I
needs a
see
little
you
bit of
play it, I'm
efficiency.
like, this feels like a James deck. It just needs that like, okay, what's my ultimate game
I
plan
think
here?
Scarab God is similar as well. Like Scarab God is a me deck with the instant speed
reanimate.
being able to reanimate stuff, yeah.
Funny little lines of play.
But I think it needs to up that consistency of how frequently I make a board state instead of exploding with a 8 mana 6/6 flyer on turn 2 or a 2/2 zombie on turn 4. You know?
I think for me, looking at the list, I was shocked to see Cormella so high. Like, I knew you were enjoying the deck, but seeing it quite noticeably right at the top of the pack there, I was really like, wow, this is really where you want to be at the moment.
You don't see me play a lot of CDH because
No.
I'm usually, playing with my other play group or on Spell Table with the Discord, but it is a great time. Like like CDH for me for a bit, especially when I was playing only Niv, was becoming a bit stale.
Sure.
And I needed something new to spice things up. And Cormella is just everything I wanted and more. Like it's complicated win conditions. It's on the stack interaction. It's a new color that I get access to that I never had access to before. It's a new strategy. Like Niv was a control deck. This is a turbo deck at its heart. And it's just something new and refreshing that I never thought would reinvigorate me for CDH as much as it did do.
Sure, yeah.
You know?
I think for me, and then in terms of stuff that seemed low, I mean, I'm not shocked, but I was sad to see the Ninth Doctor so low. I've said this before, but I really like that deck.
It's so weird.
I understand why, like, it doesn't do the thing that you want it to do, and it doesn't end games. But it is a really wildly fun deck to watch. So I'm excited to see excited to see the spiritual successor to that deck, which I suspect will be a Grixis, Clara Ninth Doctor? Was that the vibe? Or
I'm thinking I might just make it Obeka.
Okay.
Because I think like I could put the Ninth Doctor in the deck. Like it still helps me out. It still works. But I think Obeka is just objectively better. Do you know what I mean? Like the thing that makes it objectively better is the Ninth Doctor can give me 1 extra upkeep, right? And with Strionic Resonator, like copying that ability, it can give me a couple more.
Yeah.
But Obeka can give me lots more because it gives however much damage she deals.
It's also immediate, right?
It is. That's the other thing.
Immediately after combat, is that right?
After combat, before your second main phase.
It's a massive difference.
It's huge.
Having to wait a full turn cycle before any of your things to have any effect whatsoever for the Ninth Doctor versus like, okay, play my Phyrexian Arena, go to combat, Obeka deals combat damage, get 5 upkeeps, draw 5 cards, lose 5 life.
Crazy good.
That turn versus like, oh, now everyone has a full turn cycle to answer my Obeka or my whatever.
That's the thing that does my head in about the Ninth Doctor. It's really a telegraph deck. Like it puts a big neon sign up and says, I'm the threat, but in a turn. Yeah. And like it's almost like throwing a loaded gun into the middle of the table and be like, you guys have a turn to kill me. I don't know what you can do with that loaded gun in the middle of the table, but you can...
You're really holding a glowing neon sign, aren't you, with that deck?
It's really rough as a deck to get any immediate value from. You have to work incredibly hard. Like a Sphinx of the Second Sun is like the way to do it. And that's an 8 mana spell. Like it's a hard deck to get a win under someone's nose. Like it's really like it can win, but that's if no one has interaction. Yeah. And I've got 3 opponents. Yeah. Unlikely.
And good opponents too.
Yes, yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. Well, in terms of like how this relates to how much fun I have like playing against
that's so
decks,
true. You asked me, how does this level up with you?
Honestly, there's not a super strong correlation for me. I like some of these low decks a lot. I like some of the high decks a lot. I think it's interesting that obviously you have more CDH decks you could have put in there, but you do just in general have fewer casual decks than me. Mm-hmm. And I think by virtue of that, there are just likely to be fewer kind of dregs decks, I just don't have the time to play all of my decks. And so, there were like
Ayula
decks.
is my one Dreg
There's
deck.
kind of the only one.
Yeah.
Like, there's other decks. I see what you're saying. Like, Ninth Doctor might need a new commander. A Scorpion God might need a rework. But there's no other decks where I look at it and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. I see you miserable playing it. Like, no, it's just Ayula really for me that has that happen.
Can I point something out? This might be an effect of the Tinkerer versus Architect effect.
True.
Because like I have less decks, so I spend more time on each of them on average. Like let's say if we have, 100 hours to spend on all of our decks.
Yeah.
You have to divide that between more decks than I do.
Sure.
So I get more time to think about what I enjoy in each of these decks. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that does make sense for sure. I highlighted Ayula already, and I think that was the only one that I thought of that I was like, even before I'd done this list, if you were like, which of my decks do you think I have the least fun playing, I would have said Ayula.
Yeah, I think I would have as well.
The only obvious one, and yeah, it really reflected in the numbers. Like then you get a big 40 points jump up to Scorpion God at 97 points. And that reflects like how I see you play those decks where I'm like, there's like an upper echelon of like decks James absolutely loves. There's a big middle of the pack of decks that you like and play often. And then there's just Ayula sitting on its own all the way at the bottom.
She is one of the decks that sits on the shelf collecting dust. A lot of like it doesn't come to the game store nearly ever.
I see it so rarely.
If anything, the places it goes that I can think of, like the times I've played it recently, is to a friend's house where I'm teaching them how to play Magic.
Yep.
It goes to a convention where I'm likely teaching people how to play Magic or playing with very new players or that kind of thing.
It's something you do for others and not for yourself. Is the vibe I'm getting. Yeah.
Or played on stream when we're playing an incredibly low-powered game.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
And that's it. That is like the only times I would even consider playing that deck.
Yeah.
I think it needs to go.
I think we've landed on the same spot there. Yeah. And then, the top decks here, I will say, are the decks that I really closely associate with you. I think for me, that top six, that top half, and even, you could probably include Ukima at 7. But Tornos, Cormella, now that I know how you feel about it, Sally Sparrow, Savine, Niv Mizzet, Phylath, Ukima.
Zaxara even at 8.
Zaxara at 8. But
it's a big jump. Like Ukima is in 7 and that's 123 points. Yeah. And then Zaxara, which is like my big spells deck, is 106.
Yeah. I think that reflects how I feel about you and these decks, where I think not saying I don't like those decks, but I think the decks I really associate with you are those top 7 that I just said. And so I'm glad to know that my feeling about how these decks relate to you is also how much fun you're having with the decks.
It's kind of insane that we as like a play group, like, we're best mates as well. But like as a play group, I think you can almost look at your friends' lists of decks and go, oh, I know that this is the one you have the most fun with. Because I can see it in your face.
Yeah.
Like, even like at the local game store, there might be that guy with only like a couple of commander decks and he brews one on occasion and stuff, but he always plays the same one. Every time he gets the chance, it's always that deck. And I genuinely think this is a really good thing, even if you don't give your play group this formula, this chart, right? You can know just in your heart that if your friends are having a really fun time with those particular decks and they're sitting at a certain power level, then maybe you can alter your decks to sit with those decks so you can play the decks you really enjoy with the decks they really enjoy and just generally have better games of Commander as a play group.
Yeah, definitely. Because you'll be all reaching for the same decks, right? And the decks that you really want to be reaching for as well.
And that's just healthy. Like if everyone, because this is the thing, sometimes where I'll sit at a table and someone will be like, oh, let's play a really low-powered game. I'll be like, sure, I'll grab Ayula. It's a really disappointing thing for me to play that deck. Yeah. But like if someone was like, oh, let's play a really low-powered game, and I had altered one of my favorite decks, like maybe I alter Scorpion God to be at that power level, I'd be like, all right, I'll play Scorpion God. That's way more fun for me.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Big time. I think to be ultimately scientific about this, it's important to talk about limitations of this formula. One that immediately came to mind for me as soon as I saw your results, comparing results between players doesn't work very well.
No, this is a completely like player to player thing because like our weighting scales were different.
That's the big thing is the weighting. Like you just naturally weighting things slightly higher than me meant that your average or the potential for a high score with you was a lot bigger than mine. And so, yeah, you just will... If you're going to do this as a play group, I would say it's a good thing for you to show the chart on your list of decks to your other players and be like, these are the decks I have fun with, but don't be like, oh, how high is your biggest deck? Like, it won't work.
I think it's about the order in which they fall, not about the number that's associated.
I completely agree.
The score is kind of a means to an end of getting them in an order of how you feel about them.
That said, for you, the scores can be valuable. So, like, you know, when we were just talking about Ayula, like, it was 30 points below the next deck.
Yeah,
that was a really noticeable jump. But you wouldn't go like, oh, I've got a 58 deck and you've got a 40, so you'd better disassemble that. Like, that's not really something that's going to work.
Yeah, you know? No. I think you can only assess your decks in a vacuum for you when it comes to a score. But I think the value of having an order is that then once they're in order, you can go, oh, well, we're now playing in a pod where I'm playing Tornos, Walt's playing Gandalf. This is going to be a great game because we just like these decks.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I would say is that the importance of the categories is going to vary a lot between people. And some people are going to find that one or more of these categories don't matter to them. I do have a couple of potential solutions to this. You can put a 0 in a weighting column, in which case it straight up won't count towards your formula whatsoever.
You don't even need to put in answers at that point because it'll times it by 0 and it will equal 0.
If power is a non-issue for you, just put a 0 in the power column. That'll work it out. You could also change any of these fun factors to something that matters more to you.
This is what I was thinking quite heavily because when you sent me the variables, I was like, is there anything that I would think that I would put in place of maybe power, for example? And like there was a few options, like, you know, there's a bunch of different things that we've discussed on this podcast. Like, I mean, just then we talked about how much fun your opponents have when facing the deck. Is that really important to you?
I could have given James the list of my decks and gone, hey, rate this out of 10, how much fun you have playing them, and then I could factor that into my score. That'd be really interesting.
And then there's also like, you know, we've done a whole episode on mental upkeep. Like how challenging is a deck to keep track of?
Yeah.
Is it really important to you that it's got a very low mental upkeep?
Yeah.
Or is it important to you that you have to really focus to make sure the deck works?
Yeah, something we spoke about last week as well when we were talking about bans was turn length and the average amount of time that you occupy in a game. We were talking about Nadu, obviously, and how much you have to steal the game spotlight for the entire time you're doing that deck. But yeah, this might be something that you factor in and kind of go like, oh, you know, I love playing this deck, but, you know, no one else likes to see me storm off.
Yeah.
And that might be something that factors in the terms of like how long's your average turn? Is it going to be really long? Is it going to be really short?
And that might also affect the other variable of how much fun your opponents have playing against
exactly.
the deck.
Yeah.
I think one for me that was like a really important variable that if I were to redo this experiment, I would do it with this variable, which is how long it takes to assemble a winning board state.
Right.
That's something that really factors in for me because it's kind of answering two questions in one, right? Which is how long is the game going to go and how much turn economy are you going to take up?
Right. It's a similar kind of question of going like, if my deck takes this long to assemble a board state that's going to win the game, then I'm probably going to take a bit more of the turns. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
And also like I'll give you an example from my decks, like Ayula, for example, right? That takes an incredibly long time to assemble a winning board state. I need a lot of bears and I need them to be powerful and I need to have a spell that does an overrun type of effect, right? Whereas like Tornos, the other end of the spectrum, that can assemble a winning board state pretty quickly, like, and pretty not like instant win combo like on turn 3, bam. But like the cards, the amount of hoops that I need to jump through might be there, but they're easier to jump through. I'm really struggling with explaining this in an articulate way.
It makes sense. I almost think you could substitute this for the power column. Because I think it also is going to track along the power scale quite well as well, where the really powerful decks, as we know, have 2-card infinite combos and that kind of thing.
Yes.
Assembling a winning board state for that kind of a deck is trivial. Yeah. It's very easy.
Assembling Tainted Pact and Thassa's Oracle, you need them in your hand.
Yeah. Those 2 cards and 4 mana and you're good, you know. Yeah. But yeah, there'll be other decks that take a lot longer and then, might contribute to a longer game, which will affect other things like opponents' enjoyment, like your enjoyment of how long your turns take. Yep. Yeah, I think that you could quite easily substitute that for power and get some really interesting results.
Yeah, I think that was a big one for me. I think the other limitation to this whole experiment is kind of a weird one, and it's the unquantifiable.
Sure.
There are aspects of our own like view of a deck that are either often hard to put a number to put a number against it, or just straight up impossible.
Yeah.
Like, for example, there are like factors like nostalgia and memories. Like that's a big one for me, right? Like the reason, like that was why it was so hard for me to see Niv in 5th place, because that is my deck. Like that Niv Mizzet Perun, I have a necklace with his logo. I have shoes with his name on it. Like it is such a nostalgic thing for me. And like I have a lot of memories around how that deck went from super janky to powerful to CDH. You know, there is obviously that factor that you could include in the fun variables and put a number on, which is the joy it brings to other people. But you kind of answered that pretty well. Just give this to your friends and be like, rate it out of 10. How do you go?
But even that is quite hard to put a number on. I agree. You know, there are decks that sometimes you have a great time playing against and sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're worth keeping around because of the potential for sometimes those decks are really going to be fun to play against.
I've sat against your Cascade Averna list before and gone, this is brilliant. I'm having a great time. And then sometimes I've sat against it going, can you hurry the fuck up, please?
I mean, it's in terms of that turn economy thing, like it's a deck where it'll be like, okay, I've got to resolve my Apex Devastator.
Yes.
I hit another cascading creature. I guess we're at 5 cascades now.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a big thing.
Watch me play Solitaire for a bit. But also, like, there's a factor of how a deck can represent you, which I think, because it's funny, we've both said in this episode, like, oh, that deck is so you. That is so hard to quantify.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? Like, out of 10, how much is this deck a you?
Yeah.
Well, that is a hard number to put on something.
Well,
but
it's interesting. As you're talking about this, the deck that immediately comes to mind for me is my Seguin Hero of Ashvale deck, which is a deck I've had for a long time. I have spent so long building and trying to make it feel exactly the way I want it to feel.
And you do get giddy when you do the knight thing. You're like, I've got an army of knights. Like,
when I win with last one standing, you know, I feel like I'm in the arena of battle. And like as we saw, that feeling I have towards the deck was not captured at all by the numbers. It appeared right at the bottom of my list.
But if we could somehow theoretically factor that in and make that an objective number,
it would pull the score way higher.
Jump it way higher. Yeah.
No, it's true. I think always when we quantify things, it's important to keep in mind the things we can't capture in that data.
I mean, like at the end of the day, how do you quantify love?
Yeah.
Like that is like, I know we're getting real deep at the end of this podcast, guys, but like genuinely, like as Commander players, a Commander deck is a labor of love.
Yeah.
It goes from this, you know, idea to a concept to a list on Moxfield to a card order to sleeved up at a local game store. And then from there, you develop memories with it. You create these stories with your friends.
Yeah. And it often goes through several iterations over a period of years.
And it
sometimes.
changes. It evolves. Like that is, if anything, like that's the closest definition of love that I can get. Love changes and evolves and develops and grows with you. That is a Commander deck. Like it is insane how much is so feeling based. Like, of course, we can do this like maths until the cows come home. But there is the unquantifiable, and that's something that if you do take advantage of this template, keep in the back of your mind. That there are things that you're not going to be able to have contribute to this final score.
Yeah. When that deck appears at the bottom of your list and you go, that doesn't feel right, that's because it's not right.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel right because that's not where that deck sits for you.
Yeah, like for me, Ayula, I'm happy to take the sleeves off that deck. Like, that is fine.
Yeah,
but
and
like,
my Marin deck, the same.
Scorpion, like if I didn't have Ayula and Scorpion God was at the bottom of the list, I'd be like, fuck no, I'm not disassembling that deck. No way, no. And that was the second lowest. So like, even though it was like right at the bottom of the list, I don't want to disassemble it.
No.
But there's other reasons why. And we were talking about that. It forced this conversation about what it is about the deck that I need to change to bring that number up.
Yeah.
To make me feel more validated in my affection towards it.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there are so many factors that contribute to a deck you really enjoy. Some much more important to us than others. Giving some genuine thought to what your decks have and lack will allow you to make more informed decisions about the future of your decks, and more excitingly, what future deck might fill that missing niche in your collection. That said, you should define your fun the way that you want to, and don't let us tell you otherwise. So, Space Commanders, command received!
I'm glad you said don't let us tell you otherwise, because I feel like sometimes we get on a high horse on this podcast.
Yeah, definitely.
But like, you can listen to this and be like, that's really interesting. I'm never going to do that.
And that's so fine.
That's so fine.
You're so welcome to do that.
If it's forced you to think about it, then that's what I'm happy about.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I'm happy about.
To you listeners, do you feel commanded? What do you think of the fun factor formula? And are you going to use it? I want to see your results if you do.
If you do, please share it with us. And you can share it on all the platforms, at Get Commanded on all of them. But genuinely talk to us live in our Twitch channel. Be like, hey, James is playing Scorpion
153
God.
deck.
153 score deck. I can tell he's having a lot of fun because this is his Tornos deck. You can see us live at twitch.tv/getcommanded, or you can watch all that content later on YouTube. But if you want to talk to us directly, jump in the Discord. Such a great place to share this kind of conversation.
Absolutely. And you'll definitely want to check out our Patreon page, especially if you want to get immediate access to the fun factor formula.
And other stuff. There'll be more episodes like this.
Oh, absolutely there will be. So we'd like to thank our patrons, Fuzzy, Bottomless Potamus, Dyer, Dylan Norg, Bertie, Crazy Logic, Benjamin, and Henry Solis.
Big breath in.
And an extra special shout out to Fletcher Cutting and Wizard Down Under, who support us in the Space Commander tier. You're the best.
You are the best. And once again, thank you to Palms Off Gaming for sponsoring this podcast, as they have been with us from the very beginning.
Yeah.
These guys create awesome deck boxes, sleeves, binders, and other gaming accessories, and play Magic in their offices on Friday afternoons with us, which is really cool.
I'm pumped to make it to the next one. I've missed a couple now.
I want to make a piece of content around those.
Oh, we'll
games.
have to.
I think that would be really fun. Maybe whether it's even a short TikTok of all of us being silly or like a vlog style thing.
Of like teaching someone how to play Magic or something. Yeah,
that kind of thing. Or just seeing them progress. Like last time I was there, one of the podcasts, Jack, was like, oh, I remember this ruling from last time. You explained this to me. And it was like, I get this. I get this.
Yeah.
I was like,
progress.
So if you want to support us and the amazing team at Palms Off Gaming, go buy their stuff at palmsoffgaming.com.au/#getcommanded. You get a nice 10% discount on all of the great stuff they make. Sleeves, boxes, deck binders. Deck binders? Wow. I've just revolutionized something. I meant deck boxes and binders and said the binders and box. I skipped over that.
Binders.
Deck binders.
Get yourself a deck binder at palmsoffgaming.com.au /#getcommanded. If they don't have one, write to them.
Tell them.
Get them to make one.
What I want is a way to organize my 16 commander decks
into a binder.
In a binder format.
And tell me exactly how I can shuffle.
Yes. God. Okay.
Imagine that would be a piece of tech.
That would be like revolutionary. It would really be revolutionary. Let's get out of Magic.
Yeah,
let's planeswalk. What have you been doing recently, man?
I'm sure I've mentioned this already, but I've been really in on this Skyrim streaming.
You've mentioned it already.
Have
just
I?
a few times.
Have I? A few times.
Just a few times.
It's just been so fun.
I've enjoyed watching them, actually.
Yeah.
I will say. I'm not a Skyrim person at all.
Yep.
Like, it is just not a type of game that I gravitate towards to. I wasn't in it at the start, so I don't have all the nostalgia around it.
Yeah, which a lot of the chat is like, oh, it's blah, blah.
Yeah.
And James is like, okay.
Cool. I like that treat.
Yeah.
But like watching you and your partner play it is my favorite thing about it.
Yeah. So it's twitch.tv/Walt_and_Electra.
Yep.
It's also in our Discord in the other games channel. I ping there every time that I go live.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been really fun. Like, honestly, I just getting to see Electra experience all of the mods that I picked out has been a real delight.
That's my favorite thing is just watching her like run into something new and be like, oh,
yeah,
cool.
What the hell is going on here?
There was a stream the other day where she ended up in like a wizard type tower thing, and there was this whole like little side quest on like, and at the end of it, it just kind of like. What the wizard got hit by lightning, right? And she died.
She was a necromancer, and she was trying to turn herself into a hag raven, which are like these like very grotesque but like witches with like all these powers. Right? Yeah, very powerful things. And so you had to like go and fetch all these ingredients. It was a very weird quest involving a house full of very strange family.
Oh, that was a whole thing.
That was all really weird. It was a lot of fun. And then
they faint at the dinner table, right? They just kind of like
pass out.
Died. Oh, they died.
She poisoned the stew.
Ah, cool.
So they ate it and died. Anyway, then we went all the way back to the tower. We had to put the ingredients in a particular order. She couldn't remember, like the person who was supposed to tell us. So we put it in the order that she thought she'd remembered correctly. And then she died. She did not have anything else happen to her. It was hilarious.
The most anticlimactic thing I've ever watched.
So funny though. And like Electra loves roleplay when it goes wrong. Like, you know, committing to the roleplay so much that you stuff up is like her ultimate goal. And so I was so glad that like that was a quest that let her do that.
Well, I think this is the thing that I like about like role-playing games like Skyrim, especially when it allows for you to go wrong, because that makes it more real. Like in life, everything isn't always an adventure and like has a beginning, middle, and end. Sometimes it's got like a beginning, a middle, and then you never return to that quest ever again.
Yeah,
like, do you know what I mean?
Definitely. And I think that like in stories, and you know, role-playing games are just stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
Stories have great moments when a character makes mistakes, right? Like
if anything, that's the point of character development.
Yeah, that's what creates the tension in a story, and that's what tends to create the stories that define who a character is. It's like, oh, I thought that I understood this thing, and then I went and did this thing and stuffed it up so badly that I know I don't understand that thing very well.
I need to go learn that thing a little bit more.
100%. So yeah, if you want to tune in, we're streaming about once a week at the moment. Twitch.tv/Walt__Electra.
It is such an original name. Big fan.
Walt and Electra. It's us streaming. Yeah, it's been a heap of fun, and we'd love to have you in the chat. So if you got the time, tune in.
Yeah. Go hit the follow button on our Twitch channel and Walt's and Electra.
Yeah, you'll have the window open. You can do both. Come on.
We should stream at the same time.
Oh, competitors.
Yeah. Have it so like I'm playing Arena, you're playing Skyrim with Electra, and then our viewers can just have both windows open.
True. we could actually, thinking about it, we could do a little raid where you could be streaming Arena and I could schedule a stream for just after your stream.
Oh, and just carry the
raid
people
us over to
Walt
and Electra.
You know, we could just jump in the same Discord call and I could just be like, how's Skyrim going?
What's it called? Squad streaming? You can do that, right?
Yeah, you can stream on multi-channels. That's funny.
Imagine. Anyway.
The crossover of Skyrim. There'll be a Skyrim secret lair one day. But
I
Bethesda
think
will
people
100%.
have talked about it. Elder Scrolls have been like, I think they might even have mentioned that it's coming.
That would be a huge one.
They've already done Fallout, which is Bethesda. So
but that's so true. Bethesda does Fallout.
Yeah,
so that's like
the
already...
the relationships are already there.
The meeting room is already had.
I'm predicting within the next 12 months, we will get a Bethesda either secret lair or set.
I reckon they'll do a secret lair.
Elder Scrolls, I mean.
Yeah, I reckon
secret
they'll
lair
do
first.
a secret lair, test the waters, and once they realize how fucking hyped everyone is on it, they'll be like, let's do full Lord of the Rings set for this.
If they do it, that may be the first secret lair I buy. Wow. I haven't bought one yet, and I think that would probably, depending on how well they did the art treatments, but like, it would not take much for me to look at a card and be like, absolutely.
I think you would have to get up at the Cracker Sparrows to do it.
I know. Oh, it's such a silly system. Yeah. Anyway, whatever.
Anyway, that's a whole nother episode.
Yeah, let's look at another time. That's all we got time for. We'll see you next Friday for another transmission from the Space Commanders.
Goodbye, fun having Commander players.
Bye.